Excellent. I'm going to get us started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dylan Rodríguez. I'm the co-director of the Center for Ideas in Society, and I'm a professor in the Department of Black Study, the newly formed Department of Black Study, and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies at UC Riverside. It's a privilege to welcome y'all to today's event on the anniversary of the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Lil Bobby Hutton, a discussion on captive maternals and war resistance with Joy James and Kalonji Changa. Just a heads up, this event's being recorded. It will be posted on the Decolonizing Humanism playlist of the Center for Ideas in Society YouTube channel, as well as on the Black Power Media YouTube channel. Captions are available on the Zoom interface, and we'll go from there. So I'm privileged to MC this event as part of the programming stream that I'm curating at the Center for Ideas in Society titled Decolonizing Humanism. I'm also grateful to the co-sponsors of today's discussion, the Department of History, the Department of English, and the Department of Black Study. Today's event commemorates the state-sanctioned, state-executed killing of Lil Bobby Hutton, a founding member of the Black Panther Party who was gunned down by the Oakland police at age 16, 55 years ago today. Then as now was a moment in which the US nation state was tactically accelerating its long historical asymmetrical war on Black liberation communities and organizations. For those unfamiliar, many North American universities include boilerplate land acknowledgements in the introduction of campus events. I humbly dissent from this practice of acknowledgement by offering instead an urging and provocation toward activation, mobilization, and collective study and movement against conditions of occupation, anti-Black violence, and coloniality. Thus, I open this occasion by acknowledging Rupert and Jeanette Costo's legacy of reclaiming, protecting, and sustaining Indigenous presence at UC Riverside, including epistemological, archival, and physical forms of Indigenous thought and being. The University of California, of course, is a settler colonial institution that occupies unceded land and ecologies continuously inhabited by original and ongoing human caretakers, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples. This colonial institution continues to be populated by Indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world, many of whom are among faculty, students, and staff. UC Riverside is blocks away from the site where the Riverside Police Department stole the life of 19-year-old Taisha Miller not long before I started working here. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with which the university has a cooperating police relationship, is regionally and nationally notorious for creating cruel and fatal conditions in local jails for people awaiting trial and who cannot afford bail. It's a shared responsibility to address how the University of California is actively complicit in long and ongoing histories of anti-Black state and state-condoned violence. It's thus with a sense of urgent obligation that I offer these words in place of the sanctioned so-called land acknowledgement. I'm honored to open this precious occasion by urging all of us to build on Rupert and Jeanette Costo's example by seeking new and old ways to create decolonized, abolitionist, and liberated futures. Welcome to all of you. I'll continue with a brief introduction of today's speakers and an outline of how we'll proceed. Thank you all again for being here. Joy James, Professor Joy James, is Ebenezer Fitch Professor of the Humanities at Williams College. She's the author of numerous books, numerous articles. She's everywhere and around us for those of us who pay attention to her work. Her 2023 books are In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love, which will form a principal part of what we discussed today. New Bones, Abolition, Captive Maternal Agency in the Afterlife of Erica Garner. And thirdly, Contextualizing Angela Davis. Joy James works with different organizations on the East Coast and co-authors with Kalonji Changa a spring 2023 monthly series on Abolition Academy. And we'll put a link to In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love in the chat for everybody who's here. Our second distinguished guest, Kalonji Changa, is founder of FTP Movement and co-founder of Black Power Media. He's co-producer of the documentary Organizing is the New Cool, and serves as co-chair of the Urban Survival and Preparedness Institute. He's contributed writings to Truth Out and is author of How to Build a People's Army. And we'll put a link to Black Power Media YouTube channel in the chat as well. Othandwayo, Mgqoboka, is a Black queer person from the anti-Black settler colony of South Africa. They are a descendant of the Xhosa people, a lover of good music, literature, and a good time. Their current research focuses on thinking about the ways in which anti-Blackness operates and is produced on the African continent, questions of gender, sexuality, and the Black body. They are here. Brianna Simmons is a Black woman of Trinidadian descent in a mixture of heterodox or what we may call mystical spiritual lineages. She gives thanks to her parents, Dexter and Evelina, her sister, Chelsea, in those which make her lineage possible. Her research examines how anti-Blackness, vis-a-vis sexual terror, the incarceration of patients who can't pay their bills, and mothering are a co-constitutive state project in 21st century Kenya. She loves. Right now, she's confronting the state of unemployment by developing her spiritual herbalism practice and playing with swords, plants, oils, and music. And finally, Laysi Zacarias was born in the genocidal state called Brazil and grew up witnessing the sophisticated Black resistance against state violence. She is queer, daughter of Sango, and a social organizer. Her latest book, Americanizando o Amor, Americanizing Love, was written in Portuguese and defends the notion of love that suits the experience of Black people in Brazil and also stands up to United States parochialism. Now her research focuses on Black Brazilian feminist organizations and collectives, the production of anti-archives, and willful forgetting. We will put a link to Laysi's book in the chat as well. An outline of how we'll proceed, I'll start by handing the mic to Joy and Kalonji. They'll kick us off with some opening comments. I don't know, roughly in the neighborhood, maybe 15, 20 minutes each, however you all want to do it. And then from there, we're going to go to Othandwayo, Brianna, and Laysi, who will lead us through a couple rounds of both prepared and dynamic questions and engagement with Joy and Kalonji. We'll go from there. From there, I'd love to have an open discussion among our participants here. And time permitting, we'll welcome some thoughtful questions from people that are in attendance. Folks in attendance, please feel free to make use of the chat. And I will get us out of here promptly at 5 p.m. PST. So with that, I welcome everybody again. I say thank you for spending some time with us together. I look forward to a great, fun, vibrant conversation. And I will hand the mic, I believe I'm handing the mic to Kalonji to start.
Cool. Definitely, it is an honor to be here with you good people, with you comrades. Thank you, Dylan, for inviting us. It's always a pleasure to be in your midst. Appreciate your work, and I'm looking forward to learn the work of our newfound comrades. How about that? And thank you, Dr. James, as well, for being one of the few people who are brave enough to be seen on screen and print with me. How about that? I want to get started by acknowledging that it is the 55th year commemoration of both the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, who his 55th would have been a couple days ago, and today Robert James Hutton, also known as Little Bobby Hutton. 55 years ago, on April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King was in Memphis, Tennessee to give a speech. His last speech, which was the mountaintop speech. I've been to the mountaintop, and he was there to support sanitation workers. And his last speech was at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis. The sanitation workers had been struggling and fighting for their rights and fighting for better working conditions and higher pay. Earlier that year, a couple sanitation workers were crushed in the back of a garbage truck, sanitation truck, while they were trying to, escape a storm. One of the things, and those sanitation workers was Echo Cole and Robert Walker. I want to definitely remember their names. They weren't just, names, but they were humans. They was family members. And, one of the things that part of the issues that the sanitation workers had with Tennessee was they couldn't utilize the facilities, the working facilities. They couldn't utilize the showers. They weren't allowed to come into the facilities when it was storms, so on and so forth. And that was part of the reason these two brothers actually climbed into the truck. So Dr. King, in his grace, 39 years old, decided to come out and support this particular movement, as he did movements across the South. On April 4th, 1969, of course, we know that he was assassinated outside of the Lorraine Motel. 2 days later, and of course, we know that over 100 cities were set ablaze, and folks were highly upset because you're talking about Dr. King. Dr. King was known for being nonviolent. Dr. King was known for, having this Gandhiist type attitude. And he was a lover of his people. And I like to say that Dr. King was a brave soul, because Dr. King often gets a hard rap. Folks usually compare him to Malcolm, but being an organizer who is based in Atlanta and has had the unfortunate opportunity to organize in places like Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana, and of course, rural parts of Georgia, for you to stand up and preach nonviolence in that particular era, in those spaces, even today would be a dangerous thing. So for this brother to stand up and do that, I want to definitely honor him. 2 days later, there was a situation in Oakland, California. Of course, many of us know, as Dylan mentioned in the beginning, that 17-year-old Bobby Hutton, one of the first 6 members of the Black Panther Party, was shot as he exited a house, a home with Eldridge Cleaver. He was murdered. He was shot 12 times. He had his shirt off, so they knew that he was unarmed. He had his hands up, hands raised, arm raised. And, they pretty much, they lit him up. This young man was, this happened 18 months after the founding of the Black Panther Party. I wanted to point that out. Little Bobby Hutton was also 2 weeks and a day from being 18 years old. So he literally never saw 18. He just missed his 18th birthday by 2 weeks and a day. Of course, people were upset about that. Over 2,000 people attended his funeral, and including Marlon Brando, who actually gave his eulogy. Tonight, I would like to discuss war resistors. And of course, we know that both Bobby Hutton and Martin Luther King were war resistors in their own right. But before I talk about war resistors, I think it's important for us to understand war, because folks get it confused and they think that war is about 2 opposing forces on the battlefield or at sea, or dropping bombs from planes on foreign troops. And of course, we know that it is about dropping bombs, because we know that domestically, May 13th, 1985, the US government dropped a bomb on Osage Avenue in Philadelphia, killing men, women, children, and even animals. This was a device that was initiated and launched by a Black mayor. So when we talk about white supremacy, we don't get it confused and think that it's all about complexion. But Mayor Wilson Goode gave permission for these folks to drop this incendiary device on these members of MOVE. We want to remind you that war is also the December 4th, 1969 assassination of Chairman Fred Hampton and Deputy Minister of Defense Mark Clark, when Chairman Fred lay in his bed sleeping after being poisoned by informant William O'Neill, who served as his security. Him and Mark Clark were, riddled with bullets. We want to remind you that war is also the assassination of El Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, that fateful day, February 21st, at the Audubon Ballroom in 1965. That was war. We want to remind you that war was also the violent assault on the Republic of New Africa, March 29th, 1969, at New Bethel Church in Detroit, 54 years ago. We want to remind you that war was also the assault and murder and assassination of 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson and his comrades outside the Marin County Courthouse. We want to remind you that war is also that 60-year life sentence that 84-year-old Rochelle McGee has served thus far. We want to remind you that war is also the 49 years that Veronza Bowers has served thus far, even though he was eligible for mandatory parole after 30 years. So he's literally served close to 19, 20 years, going on 20 years beyond the time that he was beyond his maximum sentence. That's war. War is COINTELPRO. War is the Flint water crisis. War is gentrification. War is lack of healthcare. War is lack of education. War is lack of food. And we want to remind you that of all these people that I mentioned, these particular organizations and individuals, these are what we call war resistors. So when we talk about war, we're not just talking about Ukraine and Russia. We're not just talking about what the state's talking about. You know, a lot of times we get it confused and we go whatever narrative that our adversaries speak on. And I say adversaries because I want us to be clear that we have no friends, especially in government. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or whatever particular party, this two-party system, whatever particular candidate that they have to offer us. And it doesn't matter whether, again, whether you are an African here in America, whenever you take that oath, whenever you stand up and you deny the atrocities that take place across the planet, then you are an adversary. Okay. War resistance. We all, in some form or fashion, should want to become a war resistor. There are no neutrals in war. Some folks think that, you know, I'm not really going to say anything and, you know, it's a shame, so I'm just going to, you know, tweet about it. In Islam, they say that there are one of three ways to fight oppression. One, you change it with your hand, or you speak out against it, or lastly, what we would call, or what I would call, let me correct myself, the most cowardly way would be to just hate it in your heart. The problem is right now, as African and colonized people across the planet, sometimes we are too afraid to even hate it in our heart. Hate it in our hearts. You know, we live in a society where abolition, where organizing has become some type of fashionable occupation. We have people suffering, languishing in gulags, not only in Guantanamo or in places like El Salvador, but in places like Parchman in Mississippi. We have folks who are suffering in places like Angola in Louisiana. We have freedom fighters who have given their lives. We have folks like Assata Shakur, who was on a $2 million bounty. You have others who have the luxury of touring and accepting awards and being honored by the state. I think that there's a problem in our society when we seek accolades and awards from those who wish our people harm. We're on stolen land. Dylan talked about some of the different nations represented at UC Riverside. We unite with that. Any civil human would recognize those who stood before us. So when I stand up in front of an audience, I'm not just speaking on the oppression and atrocities that are taking place against African people. I'm talking about the colonized all across the globe. We don't have the luxury of worrying about being politically correct. If the politics aren't correct, then what are we talking about? Acts of genocide have taken place over the past 400 plus years on African people. The very fact that I'm speaking to you in English is a result of war. It is a result, is an after effect of colonization. It is imperative that we decolonize. It is imperative that those who are in the academy work in the best interest of the people. One thing we hear Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, talking about was, you know, if the people, the masses of the people suffered for you to get in the seat that you're in, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the masses. So we stand here today and we commemorate folks like Dr. King. We stand here and we commemorate folks like little Bobby Hutton, but not just them. The Harriet Tubmans, the Fannie Lou Hamers, you know, the again, the Kwame Tures, the Imam Jamil Alamines, the H. Rap Browns. When you talk about war resistors, that's the ultimate war resistor. The Mumia Abu Jamals. You know, so I want to remind us that as we accept our awards, as we march towards our degrees, and we look for those grants and those handouts and those handshakes and those applause, that we remember those folks who have been captured and who are being held behind enemy lines. When you talk about reparations, if you're not talking about the liberation and the freedom of political prisoners first, then you're not talking about anything. What kind of a people would leave their soldiers, their warriors, their family members behind enemy line and not contest? It's more than just some trinkets. It's more than dollars. It's more than an acre of land or what have you. This is about people's lives. Again, I mentioned Rochelle McGee, who's served 60 years this year in prison. We all should be talking about Rochelle McGee. Anyway, I'm going to pass the mic to a comrade, Joy. I don't know how long I spoke, but I know I can get carried away. So,
yeah, thank you. And thank everybody else with this community for sharing this community with us. I want to echo some of the things that Kalonji put on the table to consider. I want to reflect and abide by the desire not to be performative. So I appreciate Dylan saying I'm not going to just read the script, you know, which has no demands. It's just an acknowledgement of genocide, but no plans and no recognition of war, right? So there's a couple of things that come to mind, and I'm glad it's a conversation because, you know, following Kalonji, my brain is churning, and I was like, okay, I want to talk about a lot. So I'm going to try to focus on three things. One would be, what is the possibility of our security apparatus or apparatuses? I guess that's the plural, being a zone of concentric circles where we encircle each other on very levels of dealing with war. So as Kalonji pointed out, we have high levels of fear, and that makes sense. The way we've been abused, dishonored, and murdered, and tortured, and raped over centuries is to instill these levels of fear and hesitancy that we don't understand our defenses or our capacity to protect ourselves. And so people are nervous about the term war itself. And I link it, though, to a concept of love, which is tied to the captive maternal. So these, I said there might be three things, it might be 2.5, 4, I don't know. We'll just have to go with that. But for me, the captive maternal moves from the early stages of conflicted or celebratory caretaker to the protester, to the movement maker, to the maroon or the marronage. And because our autonomy is a threat to the state itself, our autonomy and independence is prohibited by police forces, by militaries, by mercenaries, by white nationalists, and by those who seem to belong to us but betray us. War is what follows every attempt to be free. So our fear is irrational, but the war against us, its incoherence and its terror, has a rationality. That as we move towards autonomy, as we move towards self-defense, the violence intensifies. And that's why when I look at Mumia, who's, behind Kalonji's shoulder, I think again, like of a 14, 15-year-old is a leader, right? And the Philadelphia Black Panther Party is someone who's organized and also organized with MOVE, supported MOVE, is someone who is on the streets or driving a taxi and sees a cop brutalizing somebody and intervenes. It's someone who's shot 5 times. And it appears based on some of the info I have, the police try to stomp him to death, but he makes it through. Then there are other ways of killing us through law. And so there was supposed to be an evidentiary hearing, and it happened last Friday. It was a corrupt trial. People asked us to do various things to pretend. I'm just going to go for it. So Kalonji is my model. To pretend it's not a war, so I'm asked to write really polite statements to the Black woman judge, Clemens. Like, we hope you do the right thing. You said your grandfather, great-grandfather was lynched. This is illegal lynching. We're one. We're not one because we're betrayed on a regular basis. And so even when we do everything that is right, everything that shows that we can mask our fear with obedience and politeness and manners, we still end up facing death. And so now Mumia is supposed to die inside because we couldn't figure out how to fight, because we fear death. Death encircles us like a 360 wrap. This empire emboldens itself with death. Its capacity to terrorize, its capacity to consume, its capacity to make lives disposable, right? So the captive maternal, what is their place in war? I've said over and over again that it's a function and not an identity, so there's no gender to this. And then that becomes a problem for some people who want more conventional feminism, Black feminism. And I was there, I'm old enough to say I was there. And I helped leverage Black feminism, did the anthologies, Black Feminist Reader, co-edited Angela Davis Reader, but it's on and on and on. It's a form of productivity that Kalonji gestured to, but you also have to be careful. Because the war is not just from the police, the war is not just from the judges who are empowered to align themselves with police in terms of engage in predatory behavior. The war is where we sit right now in terms of the academy. And so there's a sophistication to it. There's a counter-revolutionary that is a professional killer. And Kalonji went through the names, a roll call of the dead, right? How did Fred Hampton and Mark Clark die? December 4th, pre-dawn raid, right? That's FBI, Chicago police. How does Bobby die, right? That's the California cops, right? So that kind of violence, we easily recognize it is counter-revolutionary, which is inherently anti-life, anti-Black, anti-freedom. But there's the anti-revolutionary, which is much more sophisticated, right? You understand when, Derek Chauvin has his hands in his pockets and he's got a knee on a neck of a life form who's calling for their mother, and he can casually glance at everybody screaming with their cell phones out, but they have no strategy for war. So then they become the witnesses of, and in some ways are implicated, almost as accomplices. We will perform death upon you, and you will be the audience. Then you will record it, and then we will turn it into a spectacle lynching and a kind of pornography. But the anti-revolutionary is not easily discerned. You don't see the hands in the pocket, and this time what you're grabbing is wealth, money, funding, right, from corporations who are aligned with the state. You don't see the knee on the neck because the words tell you how much there is possibility in the current regime. it'll be democratic futures or just futures or somebody's futures. And if you ask, well, what's the material conditions of struggle? There's a leapfrog over the soldiers, over the warriors, over the lovers, right? People don't go to war just because it's fun. It's horrifying. It's terrifying. People go to war because they love. Do people mutate into some other kind of being that you need to like, okay, I got to separate you from the crew because you're acting out. This is, your imbalances are creating more stress, more strife, and internal violence into our own communities. Yeah, that's real too. That's part of the material condition. But those people who do not self-regulate, who don't understand their capacity for love, at least in that moment of fury and rage, they are a byproduct of an imperial state. So what would a captive maternal do in struggle? I would say, and I understand this is on a level of abstraction for some, but we did a book, called In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love, so I'm going to roll with it. I would say that we would have to understand ourselves as inherently sacrificed by the state. So we agree to sacrifice, but on our terms. And our terms is that our terms are constituted by our capacity to be more than just terrorized. Our capacity to care for each other, to protect each other, and create concentric circles of safety. The people at the epicenter will be the political prisoners, will be the youth who organize. Last Friday, I met with people in Atlanta who were part of the forest protectors, and I can see in their eyes and in their faces that they were devastated by the police murder of Tortuguita, right? And then the lies of the FBI, the lies of the police, and finally the autopsy that the parents asked for show you that Tortuguita was sitting down with their hands raised, and they were shot 14 times in their face and head, right? So even when you show that you're no threat, that you will surrender, it does not matter. And again, I asked them like, okay, what's the concept of concentric circles, not of just care and love, but strategy, which would be a security apparatus, that you're at the epicenter and then there's another circle who won't do what you do. They won't go into the force. They're not constituted for that, or their levels of fear too high, but they can make another circle around you. And there's circles that can be made around them and on and so forth. And I would say then to wrap, I would hope that we recognize that our love for ourselves, for our kin, for our water, for our land, for our psyche, for our bodies, for our art, for our bravery, is what will quell our fears. But that we cannot do it on merely an individual level, that we would have to do it in collectives, like the way you've created your own community here. And through that, we would have to face not just the state forces, but the people who look like us and who have betrayed us, as well as the people who don't look like us and who betrayed us. And the people who teach us, like as dancers and performers and mimes, to read these statements that have no demands associated with them. You can recognize genocide till you die at 90 or die at 9 from a stray bullet. It is only the confrontation with genocide which will bring us life, even if it seems that it will accelerate our own death.
Thank you both for getting us started. I'm going to ask Brianna to start the round of conversation here.
Okay, there's a lot to sit with there, and what's coming up for me is a question around this position of surrender, but I did have a separate question to offer as well. Now, I was thinking about this notion of betrayal that you all have been talking about for the past few months, and I'm wondering if our investments, and particularly Black people diasporically, both in the US and outside of this imperial core, if our investment in human rights and these like robust democratic futures as the forms of freedom from anti-Blackness we Black people seem to desire means that we're also complicit in our feelings of betrayal by these structures, people, processes that we do or don't put on pedestals, then what do rebellions from and protections from anti-Blackness actually look like? And what unplanned or intuitive responses have you witnessed or done? And the done, I guess you could choose to what degree you speak to that, but that's my general question.
I was saying that I'll let Dr. James shoot off first, and then I'll back her this round, if that's okay.
No, it's not. You have to go first. I just finished talking. Sorry. It's
Okay. You did just finish. Okay. I got to kind of condense your question, right? Because I got kind of it was great, but it's kind of dual. So can you kind of give me a break it down for me if you don't mind?
Sure. I get that a lot. So good practice.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry.
No, nothing, no wrong. If Black people's investment in human rights and democratic futures means that Black people are also complicit in feeling betrayed by these structures and processes, then how do we engage a conversation or set of embodied practices that actually rebel and protect us from these things that we want to be free from, that don't take the form of robust democratic futures and or human rights, which are incapable of recognizing anti-Blackness as genocide?
Cool. I think the first thing is we have to be truthful, right? I think there's a lot of liberalism. And as I mentioned before, liberalism is one of the main tools used by our enemy. They allow us to use, and we're pretty much, it's suicidal to a great extent. You know what I'm saying? And our enemies love it because they know that they can pick us off one by one. You know, they can give you the bag, quote unquote. You know what I mean? And you'll sell us out, as James Brown would say, for chicken change. You know what I mean? So you will, until there is accountability and a lack of fear. See, we can't talk about fighting imperialist forces if we really can't. We don't have the nerve to address the contradictions that exist in our quote unquote movement, right? For the sake of being liberal, we won't speak on certain things because we don't want to come off as being antagonistic. You know, and as we know, there's two different types of criticism. There's constructive criticism and there's antagonistic criticism. I don't think you have to be antagonistic to speak on folks literally embezzling money. I don't think that you have to be antagonistic to speak on folks who are, to a great extent, grave robbers. You know, they're vultures. They feed off of the dead. You know, as Dr. James talked about, they commodify our pain, right? So we have these folks amongst us. We have the ambulance chasers, you know, attorneys, but not only just attorneys, folks who call themselves activists. And we sit back and we say, well, you know, I'm not going to say anything because it's unpopular, because this person is an elder, or this person is a woman, or queer, or a man, or whatever the case is. You know, we have all of these different reasonings and excuses. But as Imam Jamal Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown, would say, excuses only benefit the excuse maker. You know, so until we know what works and what doesn't work. We're not talking about defunding the police, because we know this is a police state. And it'd be unintelligent for our enemies to take money out of the war machine when they are just that, a war machine. Why would I take gas out of my car if my mission is to run through this crowd? Why would I put the tanks up or sell the tanks if I have over 900 military bases across the planet? Why would I defund the police when on record between 11 to 1,500 people are murdered by the police every year? Right? So until we are, I wouldn't even say brave, until we are intelligent enough to understand that these are people who are literally on the payroll of the state. And we must properly understand that, and it must be properly driven home. There's no, as my man Chairman Fred Jr. would say, no nice terms for brutal realities. We want to make it seem like, well, you know, I don't want to say anything because, you know, whatever. Let Joy James say it. You know, let Kalonji say it. They don't like them anyway, so they can get away with it. You understand what I'm saying? But it takes, when they talk about it takes a village, our oppressors and our enemies are clear about that. So we have to be just as crystal.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, of course, we know that anti-Blackness was schooled into our own lives and our own psyches, right? So it's not just a completely non-Black executioner, right? It's like we also reproduce it and we also leverage it. Sometimes I think it's done under the guise of care. And there's a lot of classism that's tied to it as well. And there's colorism, like I guess I'm not supposed to say that. But you know, there's this way in which I'm here to help you. And then so the mass is kind of undeveloped and primitive and you know, they're easily excitable because they're emotional. Like, no, the mass, however you want to define it, the people who live in the communities that are preyed upon by not just the police, but as Kalonji said, a whole system, a whole political economy that monetizes Black death and disposability. They have analyses. Their analyses are astute. And people know that because they keep taking them and bringing them into the academy or celebrity culture and leveraging them to create more commodities. It's a commodity market. And so, yes, I've used the term movement millionaire, right? But it's not new, right? It's something that we've seen over decades. So this is for me one of the conundrums of the captive maternal, which I can't figure out. But I talk about how, and I'm talking usually about the state, but the people who work for the state, right? I want to do one caveat and then I'll go back to the captive maternal and I'm trying to figure this one out. But like for me, what became very instructive with Barack Obama, and I guess I voted for him in 2008. I was like high like everybody else, right? I didn't vote for him after that, right? But it was when he invited Al Sharpton to the White House. And I was like, wait, because I had organized in New York City around Tawana Brawley, the Central Park case, other thing. And we knew Sharpton to be a hustler. And so of all the people Obama could have picked, including like liberals, centrists, NAACP, who actually were not ambulance chasers or had worked for the FBI, they went straight to the performer. And so this is when our movements get sold back to us as performance. And then so we capture it on the cell phone, and it's important to have the footage, but then what do you do with the footage? You have the record of state crime, but the only thing we can do is become the audience in our own tragedy, being led by the nice people, well-informed people with the doctorates or the positions or the location, right? In civil society, nonprofits, whatever, who are supposedly here to rescue us, and I'm doing the collective us. So back to the captive maternal. The thing about the captive maternal is that their generative powers of care are always stolen and repurposed to stabilize the state. So, you know, my mom and my aunt, they transitioned, but when they were 5 years old in Mississippi, they were forced to pick cotton. And so sometimes when I think about the captive maternal, I'm like, you know, how does that work with a child when you discipline them into labor like that at an early age? Well, then, you know, when they have families, their expectations or lack of expectations like are transferred over. But I was thinking about the antebellum era. Okay, so what happens if somebody sells your 5-year-old twins? Because that's happened in my family. You still knew they were there, but somebody sold them to the fields. So you lost them as children. They became something else as laborers and workers, right? And in some ways broken. But what happens like in the 1800s if they sell your twins like down south or somewhere else? We do break down, but then what do? What is our history? Then we take other children in who've been separated. But that capacity to stabilize, to help us grieve, to help us, the state preys upon that. We keep families structured, and then those structured families stabilize civil society, and civil society stabilizes the state. And that's the conundrum. And so when I was talking to a brilliant grad student earlier today, I was like, oh yeah, even when we get to the war resistant stage, when we throw down like in Attica or other places, we generate more wealth for those who betray us. Because the state was like, oh, we're going to have to give them some more funds, or Jeff Bezos, here's $1 million. No, it's $100 million to Van Jones and his abolition because of George Floyd and the rebellions. They're like, we have to buy this out. And so what happens, like we trigger the state and the nonprofits to flood the money in so there won't be more. So even when we go up to the stages of like, if this is war, then let's, and people do it in a pacifist way. Some people do it in a militarist way. King did it in a pacifist way. Malcolm said other things, but they were both aligned. They understood where they were. So that's the trick. That's the Trojan horse thing I'm trying to figure out, right? Like if our care is stolen and then used against us by people who say they care, but they monetize our suffering, but they won't live in our neighborhoods, they won't organize on the street, they won't even listen to people who understand the material conditions, then what we do will be increasingly more creative. I just don't always comprehend it, but I see the bravery and the love.
I'm going to move to Laysi.
Thank you, Dylan. So, because we are talking about war, resistance, captive maternal, and also love, my question is, what possibilities does the revolutionary love bring to us when we detach it from the desire for salvation, redemption, or even inclusion?
Again, to paraphrase Che, revolution is an act of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you detach love from humanity, right? You're from Brazil, correct? So we look at Dandara, right? We look at Quilombo, we look at that uprising there. You know what I'm saying? We look at Zumbi, right? And that was it was for what? It was for, there was no detaching anything, right? It was about love. It was the love for the people that caused the victory. You know what I'm saying? Regardless of where they were, if they were in the fields, if they were in the church, wherever they were, they had to rise. And the problem is it's like us as people. We are mental, we are physical, and we are spiritual. It's a combination. You can't detach your spiritual from your mental from your physical. If you do, then you fail. You understand what I'm saying? You just can't say, now there's some people that say, well, I don't believe in spirituality. Spirituality doesn't require you to believe in it. It's not a religion. They don't care what that's like saying, I don't believe in air. So what? You don't have it, what happens? You know what I mean? And this is part of the problem, part of the issues we have as a people. We try to find the easy way out. We shoot for the low-hanging fruit. We want to engage in the sidetracking of the slave. Imam Jamil H. Rap Brown, he talked about they'll take you off the offense and put you on the defense. You be saying, I want freedom. They say, no, 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 you don't want freedom. You want to marry my daughter. So now you arguing back and forth about whether or not you want to marry the daughter. Stay on task. Stay focused. If it's about our liberation, it is holistic. We've adopted this European construct. We have to put everything into compartments. No, I'm only spiritual on Sunday. You know what I'm saying? I only, gonna use I'm gonna get physically fit on Tuesdays for yoga class. You know what I'm saying? I'm a vegan because it's fashionable. You understand what I'm saying? When we're talking about war, if you're not fighting for love, then it's criminal by nature. So again, there is no separation. I mean, that's like Europeans talking about separating church and state. On the back of the dollar, it says, "In God we trust." But we know the God they're talking about is guns, oil, and drugs. But anyway, that would be my answer.
Yeah, there's this concept called quantum entanglement. And some people make it very expansive, like we came out of a soup, we're going to go back, But I'm thinking of it within the trajectory of our history, not our memories, because they get twisted by propaganda, promotion, and the markets. I said there's a political economy market for Black death and Black struggle, right? So when I think of King, to go back to King, 1963, not 1968 when he's assassinated, but the March on Washington was this huge pageant. It was a huge performance, largely run by the Kennedy administration. Hollywood stars came up, King was there. He gave that "I Have a Dream," which is the opposite speech of what Kalonji was talking about. I mean, they're both loving, but that the speech before he dies, he's talking about his death because he was faithful in the war as a pacifist. The war against imperialism, against the US war in Vietnam, against capitalism, right? But there are a couple of things going on in 1963 in Washington, and this is what I'm echoing again what Kalonji said, everything's intertwined, or what I call quantum entanglement. The anniversary of that speech is the anniversary of the murder of Emmett Till. That wasn't an accident. And Emmett Till is a 14-year-old, right, who is kidnapped, abducted in Money, Mississippi, tortured by white men. And I'm certain they tortured all over his body. So under the new definition of rape by Eric Holder, a number of years ago, he would have been sexually violated, and that would have been, sexual terror as well. He was murdered and he was thrown in the water and weighed down with some kind of fan, but his body floated up. His mother retrieved or received the body and went against the law, that's in air quotes, or you can think of law in terms of what George Jackson says, the expression of fascism, right? She has an open casket funeral for a mutilated 14-year-old. That violates everything in terms of decorum, quote, sanity, religion, no, it's the highest expression of love. Because her demand, like the other mothers I've met in Brazil and Colombia and Chicago and elsewhere who've lost their children murdered by police forces, is if you want to act like a god and take life, then act like a god and resurrect it. And since you cannot be a god, and then why do I listen to you? Your promises, your petitions, your whatever. For me, when I think again of the concentric circles, the outer circle is King at the microphone saying, I have a dream. But they're the organizers who are Black socialists who say, we're going to stamp this for people who care enough to search for the material reality, that they will see this I have a dream speech is on the anniversary of a murdered 14-year-old child whose mother probably, became a catalyst, that funeral, for Rosa Parks not giving up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama. So I don't know if I'm making the connectors as clear as I would like to, but what I'm trying to say that our decorum and like our celebration of success always has another level to it that says we understand the terror. We don't always openly, so I'm echoing what's already been said, because we fear, well, we'll put people off, they won't connect with us, etc. We don't actually talk about the violence. Like people can make statements in Atlanta, but they don't mention how Tortuguita was murdered. They just ask for democratic futures. You don't get democratic futures until you stop murdering us. But since you didn't ask for that as a tangible, that's not a real ask. It's aspirational. And so this is the last connector, right? So I started with Obama. It's not my fan. I'm not a fan, right? But whatever. So Obama is in Denver in 2008 accepting the nomination from the Democratic National Committee to be their champion, right? Well, what's the date that he chooses? He chooses the date of King's speech. Well, what date is that? That's the date of the murder baby. And nobody knows. It's like, are you like watching this? If you keep peeling back the layers, you will find our charge. And it's totally entangled on every level: spiritual, intellectual, political, self-preservation, community preservation. And I think that's the beauty of it, despite the terror, that we've mutated into something that is always alive.
Othandwayo, keep us going.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon if you're in California. I mean, just to continue that point, there's a couple of things that are running through my mind. And the first one is democracy and representative democracy and, desires for inclusion into the process, and Western theory and womb theory, right? The idea that, in fact, this thing that's offered to us as freedom, i.e. democracy, is parasitic with our existence, right? So that democracy is sustained by the continued ritualized deaths of Black people. I mean, I think about 1994 in South Africa, Mandela walks through exits the door of prison. Now there's democracy, multiracialism, everything is fine in South Africa. And I look around and every single day, South Africa's social, political, economic reality relies on the continued denial of anti-Blackness and deaths of Black people, right? So that's the first point I was sort of thinking about as you all were talking. But the second point that I wanted to make, and I don't know if it's a question or not, but in this idea of sort of war resistance, in the idea of revolutionary love, I picked out a term in your texts on the womb of Western theory, Joy, about leverage as opposed to feminism or intersectionality or any mode of resistance, right? You use leverage as what the captive maternal activates within the Black matrix, right? So how is that shift from sort of a more humanist language to something like leverage? What does that do for us? How does that shift the fight, the structural antagonisms that we're identifying, right? And does it have anything to do with revolutionary love, in the sense of revolutionary love as the ability for stealing time back, right?
Yeah. Okay. So Kalonji, I'll jump first.
Stop there.
Yeah, because I think the subtitle of the Womb of Western Theory is Trauma, Time Theft, right? And I was very ambivalent because I felt, I mean, you had the questions you all have posed, the three of you are brilliant. This one is like, it's like climbing a skyscraper, so without an elevator. So I'm just going to try to take little pieces of it, okay? I used to be very bitter about the time theft because that's the only thing you can't get back. And I was also bitter, like I agreed to work on this grant or do something for this, university or the corporation or whatever to perform a kind of liberalism where I had faith in democracy. Whereas if I want to be candid with you, and people say, oh, do more therapy because you messed up around this, whatever. But like for me, my father is a military officer, and how he died pretty much by his own hand. I have a grievance with the imperial state because he couldn't find other jobs, and he had a college. Well, I'm just going to go in and be an officer and do like probably some heinous stuff. And for my mother and my aunt, who I love dearly, to be in the fields at 5, it's kind of like you killed both my parents. So you just like walked around a little longer, and then they, just went out, because that's how damaged people are. And so what you don't get back is what I was focusing on. And so it's really bitter. But I kind of understand that theft is built into the machinery. So then rather than focus on that, I figure out what I can steal back. Like I'm taking my time back, I'm taking resources out, totally legal, nobody look for me, gonna redirect some sources to some, nonprofits that are not like wired into the bank, right? And so I'm sorry, I almost need you to restate what you, just tell me one more time, like I need you to say it again, because I think I got like, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, on the time theft and part, or the part on this concept of leverage?
The concept of leverage, right? And also the concept of language. So, okay, I'm going to be really unpopular what I'm going to say right now. But I'm not going to say names. So this is an example. I would go visit some political prisoners inside, and then they wanted to, because you brought up South Africa, do something around Mandela. And I said, well, kind of my read on Mandela, like, well, they got out early, or they were meeting separately, and it looked like they're capitalists. And so how does this work? Why is this your matrix, right? As somebody who's incarcerated as a revolutionary, that I've written about or anthologized or something like that. But then later I sent in Recharge Genocide document from 1951. The Black Communist Civil Rights Congress, put that out in response to the formation of the UN after World War II, but also the lynchings, right? And so just like, this is the way we go. And so decades later, I'm like, well, maybe you should read this, but not thinking it was going to be the human rights narrative that was going to be picked up, that you could critique it and then create something different. Like, don't get, vacuum sucked into the machinery of democracy as a global project, and as an empire actually gives a damn about anything than accumulation. But that went a whole other way. And I kind of was volunteered to leave a committee or got pushed off, whatever. But this whole going back to repetition. And so that is what I was trying to talk about, the captive maternal. We're captive because of the genealogy of terror and genocide, but we don't have to be captive in terms of our resistance. We can be creative. We can sabotage the saboteur, right? All legal, right? Whatever. But one of the things to think about is our lack of desire to use leverage. And so for me, that is what the leverage, because first when I was trying to do the captive maternal book, which nobody will publish because like, it's not a real thing. And I'm like, okay, then I go to another publisher. But the cover of it has like these empty schoolyard with the seesaws, right? So the leverage is like, you get on and then you could leverage something up, or if you can balance it, that would be, if you could balance and maintain your stability and not have leverage used against you. Because there are wars in which you can go on the offense. Kalonji brought this up before, and sometimes you have to retreat. And then that retreat doesn't mean that you have to go from war resistor all the way back down to the celebratory caretaker, even though I think a lot of people did. That in one historical period, when revolutionary songs were always being sung, it was easier to be a revolutionary because other people were doing it and you just had to be adjacent. And then when people get shot up, disappeared, and then they go in prison, then you come back down. It's like, well, let me be celebratory of the democracy and be a celebratory, you know, caretaker, or in terms of captive maternal. The leverage, if we continued the leverage would take us out of these corridors of relying on the United Nations, on relying on texts that are historical from the 1950s. And when they were dropped then, it was chilling for the US because it's during the Cold War. And the Soviets can leverage that. It's like, wow, this is some homicidal state called capitalism that preys upon Black bodies. But that, you know, 1951 is not 2023. The state got smarter. You have like Harriet Tubman, a statue of her, in the quad of the CIA claiming that she's their spy, that she's the progenitor. It's like, whoa, you guys steal everything, and they will. Even, you know, and in Rosemary Mealy and I were joking, like, well, did she have her guns? You really think she wouldn't turn around and like confront you for her freedom? It's like, no, because it's all capture. So sometimes it's tunneling out, sometimes it's just disrupting, sometimes it's jumping off the seesaw, sometimes it's balancing it. But I would say, and I'll wrap with this, you know leverage when you see the risk. You know the leverage is going in pursuit of revolutionary love when you understand the risk taking behind the leverage. But most people are claiming that they're leveraging something, but it's mostly rhetoric and promissory notes. There's only freedom dreams if you fight for freedom. There's no freedom dreams just because you put it in a text or made a declaration about it. And so for me, the captive maternal caught in the matrix, always grieving, but always loving, that becomes a zone of all possibilities. But those possibilities are not going to happen without a cost.
Yes. I mean, you took it all the way home. I'd like to say, you know, yeah, in the spirit of Steve Biko, in the spirit of Chris Hani, in the spirit of Winnie Mandela, you know what I'm saying? We keep the, yes, we keep that, you know, that drive. You know, we don't, you know, to quote the rapper Chuck D, we don't sell out unless we get the hell out. You know what I'm saying? We're not here for that. We have to be clear that United Nations, NATO, the US, France, Portugal, Belgium, Spain, enemies. We must be absolutely clear about that. We don't choose sides just because of we hate one more than the other. You know, we hate the master, period. We got to be clear about that. You know what I'm saying? We don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, or any of that type of stuff. We have to be, when we talk about the whole leverage, again, the question that I'd like to ask is, what does that mean for revolution? At the end of the day, what does it mean for our liberation? You know what I mean? There's not a trinket, there's not an award, there's not a poster, there's not a day to commemorate. Anything that the state gives you, they can take back. We can't beg for our liberation. They don't respect that. They don't respect that. And I want people to know that are watching this, this isn't any tough guy talk. I'm not talking about, you know, like, you know, we're saying, let's just, you know, let's go crazy. I'm saying, no, we have to be intelligent, and we have to understand that, yes, as Joy pointed out, you know, there's battles and there's wars. You know, we lose some battles. The war is the ultimate. You know what I mean? It is ancestral treason for us to stand up in the name of some of these freedom fighters and not do anything near what they did. We have folks who are judgmental about so many people that stood up and did something. If your work is only relegated to social media or what pictures you're in, or what video you're in, then you're really not doing anything. If you are relegated to how much press coverage that the state will give you, then it's problematic. You know, we get caught up. We think that because we have nonprofits with fancy names, with the blackest names, that we're moving towards victory. The state will never sponsor its own demise. There'll be no liberation through a nonprofit. At the very best, you'll have what Huey talked about as far as a survival program, pending revolution. You know, so the leverage has to come from us having the wherewithal, the heart, the spirit, and the energy to love our future better than more than we hate our past. We have to love those who come after us more than we hate the tyrants who've attempted to break us. George Jackson said, "I'll never be counted amongst the broken men." I live by that. Not as a slick soundbite, not as a quote on my t-shirt, not as a tweet to see if y'all like what I got to say or not. We put our soul into this. And that's the very least we can do. I live in the state of Georgia, and as I drive up and down these southern streets, I think back to folks like Harriet Tubman, who walked these roads when there were no roads. It wasn't paved. There was no street lights. You're walking through marsh and swampland and all types of other madness just to get free. And the most we can do is worry about a hustle, a grant. I mean, you have folks out here literally talking about competing against other organizations. Imagine enslaved Africans on a plantation competing with each other. This is about our liberation.
As we transition, I want to transition to opening it up into just a collective study among the five of you. But I did want to ask Joy and Kalonji to develop one particular point that that Joy raised, and which Kalonji has kind of invoked both implicitly and overtly throughout your comments, and that's this point around care, and or if we're using the genocide and warfare analytic, which I think we have to, what a lot of us have been calling for years casualty management. You know, that some of the care is actually just urgent casualty management. But Joy, a point that you made that I think is so critical, that is too often acknowledged but not rigorously engaged, is how practices of care, or what we're calling casualty management, can and are constantly pulled, can be and are constantly pulled into institutional logics into the institutional logics of anti-Blackness, genocide, and war. In other words, the casualty management itself becomes part of the war, becomes part of the anti-Blackness of genocide, including at least since 2020, I think especially since 2020, notions of mutual aid, right? Notions of transformative and restorative justice, even some, kind of bourgeoisified notions of reparation, and so forth and so on. So can I ask the two of you to develop that point just a little bit, both maybe reflecting on some examples for folks watching this, of how urgent casualty management gets tied right back into the logics and structures of war, and then also how there can be forms of care that don't do that, that confound those logics, maybe, how we could work on that. And I think you two are well situated to respond.
So I remember, like, the three of us were on the platform of Black Power Media when we were trying to keep the state of Missouri from murdering Kevin Johnson. And we, Kalonji and I had talked to him on the phone. And so I organize in different ways because, quote, I care, but it's rare that I have that proximity to death. And then understand at some point that no matter what I do, I cannot stop a murder. But the three of us showed up and we were there when they were having the last legal ditch, and we logged in for the number to hear like all these supposed defense strategies. But I realized later this is probably performative. You know, what it would take to save a life would be a confrontation with the state. And that was something we could not pull off at that time. But for me, that was tangible care. It also, for me personally, like I was disoriented for the next couple of days because, and this goes to like with this care that we're talking about, in some ways, I hope I'm linking it. It's like triage centers, right? But I think, again, because I grew up on military bases, I think in terms of war zones, like unless you can stop the war or push the predator back out of certain territory so that you can have peace, you're always running a triage center. You're always like, somebody lost a leg, somebody lost their psyche, somebody lost. And so that is a zone of exhaustion, which the state already knows. So like, we're going to give you care, but it's not going to be sufficient care, but we're going to give you care. Then we're going to shoot up the room. And then that's going to trigger you having to come out and do it over and over again. So we're doing entrapment through care. But because you care, you're going to provide care. And it's like, well, what if we cared enough to just block your next move? And organized care, I believe, is structured against the next move because it's a zone of desperation and it's supposed to be a zone of healing. Obviously, I'm not against healing. I'm against the structure, again, of a political economy, which works for the state. And so it's like these half-assed hospitals now that are consolidating or stripping people's health care and now take it into the private market. And so like, yeah, I didn't think Bernie Sanders was a saint, but I had real problems with Black people and other people not understanding that universal health care would have saved a lot of lives during COVID. So we're always scrambling because we care. And I'm not saying that we stop caring, but I'm saying that the state and corporation have determined the definition of care. What if care is, like what Erica Garner did with their people, just shut the city down, take over the subways, nothing will work. That's a form of care too. Because like you heal somebody and then you push them out the door and they go back into the zone to be another prey. So that's why it keeps recycling over and over again. It's a triage center in Vietnam, which I guess that, Dad and other people were there. And one thing I'll say, it sounds weird, but I hope it's related. I've said this story before. My dad didn't get fragged. Colin Powell was afraid of getting fragged because he was like a real trooper, gung, G.I. Joe, whatever. I don't know what my dad was doing exactly, but nobody who was Black pulled a grenade and pin out and threw it back to the officer corps because that was going on. It's a war within a war. But when I was a teen, I went to a party and I met this white guy who'd been a lieutenant, and he, people have these confessional moments. There's a Black person, I need to confess something. And his position was like, hi, whatever. I was a lieutenant in Vietnam, but this is what I did so I wouldn't be fragged. I gave out LSD and Frisbees to everybody. And so that's how I survived the war. There's a war within the war and everybody knows of it. Some people have the sense to say, I'll perform like I'm engaged in an imperial project, but I'm going to sabotage it and we'll all get high. And because he was a white guy who went to West Point or whatever, an officer, he would call in fake coordinates. It's like, oh, we're engaging the enemy right here on this hill and stuff. It's like, no, like, do you want another pill? And here's a Frisbee. I think we could, the way they sabotage our movements with care, I think we should go into their zones and start presenting like the spook who sat by the door or something to sabotage or derail them. We never accept their definitional norms because it's always entrapment. And because we care, then we get put on this conveyor belt of endless struggle and depression because we can't stop the violence. I hope that answered something.
Kalonji, I'm hoping you can help us with this too.
Cool. And I love Joy's response. It's right down my alley. But I'm gonna say, may sound cliche, proactive opposed to reactive. I think that we have to work on being as independent as possible. We have to work on self-sufficiency. We have to work on self-reliance. And there are plenty of acres of land where folks can purchase and live and teach and love and train without putting up a big flag saying, hey, we're over here, making ourselves a target. We don't have to be in uniform. You know, we're family. We start buying acres. We grow our own food. We don't have to rely on that. We give them honorable avoidance. Instead of sitting there arguing with them, debating about what came first, the revolution or the egg, you know, we move on what it is we need to move on. You know, within our organization, I represent an organization called FTP Movement. The first thing I do is I encourage folks to join an organization, but not just any organization. You join an organization that is proactive and has a track record, right? But one of the things that I love about my comrades is that we have farmers. We have a brother who was a combat medic for 26 years, and he took those skills and he teaches. One of the requirements for organization is for you to become an immediate responder, not a first responder, an immediate responder, because of the fact that we need, you know, something goes down right now, we don't have time to worry about, can we bandage, can we suture, whatever the case is, let's get it going. You know, we have different fighting styles. We practice African martial arts. We have an urban survival preparedness institute. One of the sad realities is when there's situations like Katrina and you're a quote unquote organizer, you can't be laid up in the Superdome next to the people because they're looking to you for safety and refuge and advice. But you're laid up with them, you're as scared as they are. All that revolution talk is out the window. You know what I mean? We have youth programs that's practical, teaching young brothers and sisters the respect for weapons and tools. You know what I mean? We teach them archery. We teach them, you know, an example, we have, you know, go to the range a lot. You see at certain ranges, 7-year-old white kids, literally, little white girls out there shooting. For us, we've been taught that it's criminal. We've been taught to fear the weapon. It is a tool. We believe that if you teach your children how to operate the machine, they'll have more respect for the machine. You understand? So those are some examples. Again, purchasing land and just establishing our own municipalities. There's no laws against that. Independent schooling. You know, there's no rules against us teaching our own. I know that oftentimes folks talk like this, but they have no evidence. They have no proof. We hear folks talking about free to land and sovereignty, but they're homeless. No one's going to respect that. It's more than just, it's going to take more than just a black fist. It's going to take more than empty rhetoric and fashionable militancy. It's going to take real life community. And one of the things that I often talk about is that most people that I run across don't even know what a community is. I grew up in the projects in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I often say that because I'm proud of the fact that out of my entire life, 52 years old, there was more community there than in any quote unquote organization that I've been a part of. Because there was a love for each other. We knew our neighbors. Nowadays, you can live next to folks for decades, don't know their last name, hardly know who lives there. You understand what I'm saying? We have all this theory, but not enough practice. The average cat can tell you about all types of, they can tell you about imperialism, they can tell you about Marxism, they can tell you about socialism, but they haven't committed to memory 5 phone numbers. They rely on the state's tools. We have to go beyond that. We have to organize outside of social media. You know, we have to create situations where we can communicate with our people without relying on their systems. So system building is is what I would say.
Let's keep the flow of this discussion going. Othandwayo, Laysi, Brianna, why don't you, one of you pick us up and keep us pushing?
No, as you were talking, Kalonji, I was sort of thinking of multiple conversations that I've had with Laysi since we started, you know, the PhD program. And this is the idea of thinking about, you know, a refusal to be legible, right? The deliberate choosing of Black communities all over who not want the state to know what they're doing, you know, to organize in silence, you know, instead of that desire to be legible, right? To put the flag there, like you're saying, right? So we're thinking about that as like an anti-archive, you know what I mean? An archive that refuses to act as an archive, refuses to be legible, right? And so that was something that we were kind of thinking about, and it takes work, as you're saying, and it takes refusal to be recognized by the state and seek any kind of state inclusion or redemption. But it also means, I mean, when I look back at some communities that are doing that in South Africa, many cases, it also means mass retaliation, you know. Black people are sort of occupying land all over, and the state is responding, you know, with violence. And that's not a shocker, because we should be anticipating that, right? That's something that the state has always done. So also, I was thinking about what would happen if we sit back and we strategize about the ways in which we know what the state is going to do next. We know the kinds of violences that the state is going to retaliate with, co-option, etc. I wonder if we ever sort of sit down, and what's the value of sitting down and not act shocked and reactionary every time something happens, you know? So that's just, I don't know if that's a question or just an open-ended thought, but yeah.
I think when you were speaking, it made me think again about the concentric circles. I mean, the people at the epicenter are the ones like the hidden archives, right? Or the anti-archive. That's the knowledge. It's just underground. I see it like kind of as a guerrilla intellectual. But I feel you should be able to make calls and demands for others to form circles around you. And they kind of radiate out, like, you know, when you drop the pebble in the water and then those ripples effect, right? Because some people won't be able to do an anti-archive, or they won't trust themselves, or they fear the state, or they need the money, they need the job, you know, stage 1, conflicted, whatever. There's a difference between a comprador who sells you out and a captive maternal. Like the comprador just is an agent, works for the state. I mean, the most famous ones would be Clarence Thomas, Condoleezza Rice. We could keep that rolling, right? It's that first stage where it's tricky because, and this is why like Felicia Denau, they were on with us a couple of weeks or a month ago, right, Kalonji? And they've been writing on Haiti and the unspoken war. So I think one, we're muted often, or we lose language because we're told, especially in the academy, what words we can use and what words we cannot, which words are legitimate, which archives are legit. And so that's why I appreciate you're going to do an alternative world, right? But one of the things Felicia was talking about was devotion. So I want to go back to the love, even if it sounds like mystical or something else. I think it's a catalyst, and it can't be fully explained, but it's a real phenomenon, or phenomena in different ways. Like I talk about it through agape, Kalonji talks about it through others. This is when you do stuff you didn't plan to do and you stay when you want to leave. Something's keeping you there on the underground with the hidden archive or the anti-archive, with like the languages that you're creating. It is the connectivity. That's real. Like Kalonji said, spiritual, like you may not want to be real, but it's like the air, it's like the ground, it's like the water. It exists. The question is that those who don't want that close proximity to guerrilla struggle, if you can leverage them, let's go back to leverage, to be in one of those outer circles, right? And so when the state comes, it has to hit the outer circles first before it can penetrate to the core. And when I was trying to talk to younger people about that, and they were like, we're anarchists and we're this and that. And it's like, I get it, but I don't get it right because I'm older and I don't understand. But just tell me about your rings of security. And it could be that I didn't quite comprehend, but I don't think we're articulate about that. I like Kalonji's response. We need to build, we need to secure land. But like the white Mississippian government is trying to undo Jackson, right? So that's when you would trigger, like, we need to call for the outer circle, like people who have clout. I mean, if you have clout money, you have it. I mean, you're not going to give it up. I understand that. So why don't you just be useful? Show up and do this one thing we ask you to do in the fourth outer circle, and then just go back and, do what you want to do with that wealth. But I don't think we've articulated demands. I did make a demand. People thought it was weird. I said, if you have your first two houses, that's fine. When you get your third and fourth property and that money, I call it George Floyd blood money. And that's true about these grants too, including what I'm working on, that goes into these colleges and universities. They didn't go to poor colleges or universities, I don't think. I think they went to elite ones. But, the issue becomes, you could make the fourth and fifth house and hospice center for people coming out of prison. Instead of, again, we have to raise money for the elders and we want to, but there's a lot of wealth out there that people could, they could keep it, but they could just say, we'll share. And I'll say, okay, you're in the sixth outer circle. Do you need a number or you don't, whatever. But the core is the core, but you still need to leverage protection or deflection. Eat up the state's time, send them down the wrong avenue or corridor, buy yourself time. That is when you leverage other people who refuse to be revolutionary. And I'm not a revolutionary, but that's when you leverage me to get something you need so that you can do what you're going to do in the anti-archive.
Right. And I think that, and just to what you just said, Joy, the difference between a comrade and a friend, the difference between a comrade and an ally, right? I think the thing is, again, it goes back to being honest. Joy just said, I'm not a revolutionary. If being honest with yourself and others, it will save a whole lot. Everyone's not going to go back to Africa. A lot of folks talking about, go back to Africa, it's the Go Back to Africa movement. Everybody's not going to live on the land here in the United States. Some folks are going to be in the city, but we still have to safeguard ourselves. And that goes back to the circles, right? It is necessary for us to build within this colony in order to survive. We're on a large plantation. The plantation is a little, I hate to use the word free, but it's a tad bit freer than the borders a little bit more, they're looser nowadays, right? But the reality is you're still being monitored, so on and so forth. So I think that, again, going back to the leverage and to what Joy was just saying, building networks of supporters, but being clear and honest with yourself. The one thing as an organizer, one of the mistakes I made in the past is putting people in positions that they didn't belong in just to fill the space. If I know that you're not into something, if I know that Othandwayo, if you're not into security, why put you on security? You understand what I'm saying? If I know that Dylan hates cooking, why make him the chef? You know, the food's going to be lousy. You know, you're not down with security. So, you know, you're going to be on Facebook or something and folks going to be coming over the wall. You know what I mean? We have to be clear about our expectations and not set ourselves up for failure. Because so often we do just that. We're looking at things that from how they could be opposed to how they are. You know what I mean? I mean, you know, you can say, well, I want Kalonji to be a muscle-bound man. I could tell you now, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? So you be setting yourself up for failure. You're promoting, yes, Kalonji the muscle-bound man, and I'm going to show up and I got a pot belly. I don't have a pot belly. But anyway, you know, we have to be clear about what it is we are aiming for, and we got to set realities that are realistic.
For the record, I love cooking. I make good food, Kalonji. So I know you were just saying that, but I just want to be on the record. And some
I'll be in Cali soon,
okay,
so
then.
You know.
Okay, then
don't just talk about it.
It is an open invitation, and y'all know that. Y'all know that.
I get there hungry.
Laysi, Brianna, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll try and be quick. My question's still forming, but a lot of what you were saying about the concentric circles made me think about flower of life geometrically. And I have a kind of meta question, but I want to bring it back to being truthful and asking about, like, what are we each in collaboration with? Because a lot of decolonizing is like shedding all of these identities and programming that we've fixed ourselves into, right? Like those who take on organizer as an identity. It's a box and it's not actually who we are. And if we are to honor the spiritual nature of being interconnected and who and what we actually are, it's constantly evolving. So I get that decolonizing ourselves will be a lifestyle practice of coming back to who we actually are, which is constantly evolving with all of these different gifts. And I'm wondering, if we're being truthful, one, what are we in collaboration with? If each of us have these different paths, these different natures that are interlinked and essential, but we have to go in different ways, what are we each in collaboration with? And truthfully, where do you think we are right now? From each of our vantage points. Sorry, I know they're different.
I want to go back to, thank you for that. I want to go back to quantum entanglement. I think that on the surface, we appear that we're moving in all different directions. But Siafu, which is a particular kind of ant army formation, I still have like my ginger politics around the queen, what's going on with her. But even when we're moving in different directions, we're still in the zone of struggle. And I want to go back to quantum entanglement. What you do in your moment in the anti-archive, or what you do in Brazil, or what you do in South Africa, or what you do, you know, around the globe, that has a ripple effect. And we just need to, it would be great if we knew more about it, so we had the mental consciousness, but in the material world, that ripples out. Just like the way they murder us ripples out. We know it has effect, because I wouldn't watch Tyree Nichols. It's like, I don't need more porn, right? I'm not looking at it. I already saw the George Floyd one. Before that, I saw like the Eric Garner one. It's like, I'm done. But I can feel, we feel when those deaths take place. We can hear them, even if it's a whisper or shout. We know something went down and we feel it. And that has an impact on our consciousness. It also has an impact on our political will. Everything we do can be done with revolutionary love, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have rage. I mean, for me, all the feelings are bundled into that phrase. And so we use what we have within and without, but the connectivity was never severed. Even when we don't quite comprehend each other, it's not always a Tower of Babel. It becomes a Tower of Babel when the state steps in, when the corporation steps in, when the mass media step in, when academia as a zone of capture and indoctrination steps in. That's when we're in the Tower of the Babel. And we can't really understand each other because we're all like different languages, different signs, even though they discipline us in one meta language. But the meta language has no heart, no soul, and no dedication, no devotion, to go back to Felicia. It's our devotion that makes us intelligible to each other. And I don't see how we ever lose that, even when we transition off, because that's how we get ancestors. And we understand devotion by understanding that they loved us, which is why they took those risks.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, again, it's love. I think that the one thing that I would dare say is that we have a love for our people as a whole, you know, a love for humanity, a love for life. So I think that is the connector. For me, who am I? I would, in my mind and my spirit, believe I was put here to organizers. I think that if I would dare say I have one gift, that would be bringing people together who normally wouldn't even know each other, or they wouldn't be together. I can kind of see how the puzzle fits. It doesn't mean I'm the best. You know, it just means that I recognize people's skill set and I respect it. And I'm able to put people in the proper position. In my soul, that is who I am. You know, and again, to piggyback off of what Joyce said, I mean, it's literally the confusion comes from our enemy. Our adversaries are masters of deception. And they will confuse us. They will confuse us so much that we actually will be thinking that we're thinking when we're not. We're sitting here really thinking that we're coming up with some type of deep concepts. Our ancestors have already laid this thing out. We are the OGs. We're the original gorillas. We are the progenitors. But we keep responding to what they're talking about. Until we move from being reactionaries to being proactive and growing step by step, then we'll remain shackled. But it's time to shake these shackles loose. You know, our truth is bulletproof. There's nothing, we already have the victory. And I know I used to hear people saying that, people used to say, we have the victory, we just got to claim it. It's true. In my soul, I know we're going to win. The issue at hand is to convince everyone else that, look, we got this. But right now we're living on this whole, it's like the Wizard of Oz. You got this little loudmouth that's barking all across the planet. 5% of the world population controlling 25% of its resources. 5% of the world population imprisoning, enslaving 25% of the world population. And they team up with the other little guys, like those Zionists over there. You know what I'm saying? And together, they run amok because of our fear. But until we decide that the side of the barricade that we want to be in is that of victory, then we'll keep having these discussions.
I hope everyone is appreciating the flow of this conversation as much as I am. I'm gonna just hand it over to Othandwayo, and I think Othandwayo, your sharing here will probably take us home to 5 o'clock. So go for it, and just I extend my appreciation to everybody who's here.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to speak maybe as we close off about one more time around this idea of revolutionary love, you know. And for a very long time, when I read those words, when I see them, struggle a bit, right? Because of course, we tend to think in sort of dichotomies, right? So when I saw that, I was thinking, is this some sort of, you know, multiculturalism, Nelson Mandela's lost dream, let's forgive and forget, redemption? But then, of course, I then took a step back and wondered a little bit about it. And I wonder if that love, that revolutionary love is looks like accountability, looks like rage, looks like violence, you know. I recount, and I always tell the story. In 2016, we had sort of roads must fall, fees must fall protests in South African universities by Black students, right? And I remember the most free I felt, it was just a couple of hours, but the most free I felt, the most in love I've ever felt is when we threw those stones at the corridors of Wits University, you know. And I looked at the people around me. I've never seen them in my life. You know, I saw them, of course, in passing as fellow Black students in the university. But in that moment, I was like, yeah, I love every single person here. And I love seeing this, you know, this institution, you know, burn down in the figurative sense, you know. So that made me sort of shift and think about love in a way that's sort of, or revolutionary love, although it's difficult for me to think about it as something that is divorced from like the liberal way in which we would understand it. I would love to hear maybe from Joy and Kalonji, your journey towards wanting to focus your work right now in this moment on this idea, on this concept. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the book is actually a collective book. I've said this elsewhere, right? That it was a series of podcasts, and the white feminists in UK reached out to me. I wasn't planning to do the book. And they asked for a book, and it's like, I'm doing other stuff, but what is it that you want? And then it became not what they want. It was like, what have we already done? These conversations, because of COVID, we were stuck inside, right? And so we were having these tape conversations at various podcasts, the Malcolm Effect, you know, by Black Brits, you know, Khadisha Diskin and Mamadou Tal, millennials, people in Colorado. It's just different zones. So I was thinking, let's transcribe our conversations and see what we have. And then it turned out we had what we needed. And there were some essays that opened it. But for me, Mumia writes the afterword. And it was very difficult to get the PDF or the book, you know, pages to him so he could write an afterword. So he had to call on, again, the concentric circle, a white ally attorney who could walk it in. And then we had to get the afterword out, because I would write to them and then my cards would be returned or something like that. And so they walked it out. Deshaun Harrison, who is LGBTQ leader and also in Atlanta, right? They have, I'm sorry, I never remember names of books anymore, but they did the foreword. And so it's not cute and cozy, because the foreword opens with a discourse on death from Deshaun. And then there's the book in the middle, there's the preface, which I'll talk about briefly, but it closes with Mumia, who has been on death row. And so Mumia, like if I look at the back of it right quick, Mumia writes on the back cover, it's an excerpt from the afterword, revolutionary love is nth degree love or love beyond measure. It is anything love. It is love without reckoning. It is love that dares all things beyond which others may find the spirit force to survive, to live, to fight another day. Such love is also fighting itself for the sake of ensuring that others may live. And so that's Mumia, right? 40 some odd years, caged, shot up, denied healthcare, torture. I mean, whatever you do, we still manage to manifest what is prohibited. which is love. Not, personal partner love, how much you love your kids or your parents, but revolutionary love, right? And so I open with the preface from about Oshun, and I'm not formally in the religion, but I talk about my madrina in the South Bronx who transitioned but helped keep me alive when I was in grad school having to do philosophy with, white liberals and white conservatives, but about Oshun's flight to bring back water because of this attempted coup against Olodumare. And the suffering, because she's known for her beauty, right? It's the deity of beauty and rivers and streams, but she flies towards the sun, so she's scorched. And she looks like an ashen vulture, but she makes the petition, it's heard, and then the waters flow, and she returns. But my reading of this story, which I heard, right, as an oral narrative tied to what was left of, the Atlantic, human trafficking, genocide, was that Oshun's capacity to love and to risk was because we loved her. And this is what I think is important. Our love is not generated through commodities culture or what the state says love or fidelity to the nation, like Pledge of Allegiance or the fidelity to whatever dictators running around. Our love is experiential because we've known it and we know when it's absent. And so that's why it's the pursuit of revolutionary love. It is not a claim of possession or embodiment, but we're the seekers. And every time you seek, you expand because you move into territory that you feared to venture into. But because of the seek, you have devotion. And that becomes the heart of the revolution.
Kalonji, could you close us out?
Yeah, basically, thank you for allowing us this space. Definitely get the In Pursuit of Revolutionary Love book. Joy was already finished by the time we started working together. I think we've been working together since August. And if I must say so myself, we covered a lot of tracks. And I am definitely appreciative of her work and Dylan's work. And I'm honored to be on this platform with the three of you who I'm just meeting today. It's refreshing to have an international perspective. It's refreshing to speak with folks who are in the academy, but not of the academy, and to the point around revolutionary love. Again, it is our life force. Revolutionary love it's intelligent. It is humanity. It is strength. It's not about, guns blazing. It's about our future. And it is in homage to our past. I think that we owe our ancestors for all that they've done to get us this far. And I'm definitely grateful to call you all comrades. I look forward to doing work beyond this Zoom screen. And I hope that, that we all picked up something of value from this. I know I have. So, nothing deep, just saying I'm grateful and I appreciate your service, as the state would say, to our enemies.
Dylan, thank you, Kalonji. Can I make 2 announcements?
Please do.
Thank you. Thank you all. This was really beautiful and healing. And it was also disturbing. So May 25th, there's going to be the night school bar in North Carolina. They're going to do a fundraiser to get books into the incarcerated for study and struggle. And Stevie Wilson, who's incarcerated in the same prison as Mumia, but can't talk to him, Stevie Wilson is going to join us in the first part. And then Kalonji and I are doing something with Inquest, the publication, abolition publication, later this month, where we're going to juxtapose the concept of the incarcerated, such as Rusha McGee, who self-identified as a slave and what that means to abolition. And, you know, his former co-defendant, Professor Davis, who identified as a citizen and so felt that laws should protect them. And again, those are two different streams. It doesn't mean they're disconnected, but we want to look again, and I know that Sean and others have talked about the Coalition to Abolish Slavery, the 13th Amendment. We want to look at this construct as well in print.
I hope that this has been emboldening and sustaining and also catalyzing for people that were here live and for folks that watch this later. I just want to close it out. It's always very abrupt, the end of these conversations, these forms of collaboration and study. So I just want to express my love for the five of you, and for everybody who came through today. My deep appreciation for being in community with you. And I'm going to fulfill my promise and do the outro right now. I failed my promise. It's 5:01. I'm sorry I'm late, everybody, but I'm going to outro us at 5:01.